Welcome to the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast, a space where all spiritual seekers are honored and celebrated. This podcast was born from the journeys of your hosts, who have each faced her own dark night of the soul, but they've emerged with an unshakable belief in divine connection, cosmic inspiration, and her true life's calling. Join us on a journey of personal growth, transformation, and magical self-discovery. Your first co-host is Chloe Brown, a gifted intuitive empath and shadow work life coach. Your second co-host is Keone Starr, an intuitive energy worker and acclaimed past life regressionist. The Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast starts now. We are so grateful to Katherine for sharing her story with us. Not only did she afford us her precious time to interview her personally, but she graciously recorded and sent her thoughts to additional questions we had during the podcast editing process. Therefore, you may notice some differences in volume and tone throughout the podcast episode, but we ask that you instead focus on her words and appreciate her spiritual journey. Welcome to the lounge. My name is Keone. Today, I am happy to introduce a new friend, Katherine Eady. She is an intuitive spiritual practitioner with a deep connection to the natural world. She finds inspiration in the cycles of the moon and has developed her own lunar planner to help align her life and goals with these rhythms. Raised in a deeply conservative Christian environment in the Bible Belt, her spiritual path focuses on healing religious trauma, discovering her inner voice and intuition, and living in harmony with nature's rhythms as she embraces a life of freedom and wonder. Welcome, Katherine.
Thank you so much, Keone. I'm so glad to be here.
The introduction, we mentioned that you had grown up in a deeply conservative Christian environment. Why don't you give us some background on where you come from and how you embarked on your current spiritual journey?
Yeah, so if you're familiar at all with the Duggar family from the 19 Kids and Counting show, that's very similar to the lifestyle that I was raised in. I was homeschooled all my life. My family and my church really believed in courtship and women wearing skirts all the time and women submitting to men. There were lots of rules for women. And I was all in on it for most of my life. Of course, I was very sheltered and isolated a lot when I was younger. And so I didn't have a lot of exposure to other worldviews or religions or ways of thinking and believing. So I was all in on it. And I had a born again experience when I was about 12 years old. And I, committed my life to Christ. And through my teen years, I was really on fire for the Lord, as they say. And it didn't really hit me until about my early 20s. Several different things happened kind of all at once. I lost a couple of people that were really close to me, and I went through a courtship that ultimately failed and ended kind of badly. And in the broader church as a whole, there were some scandals going on. Just a lot of things happened all at once that really made me start reevaluating the things that I had been taught and the things that I believed. And the more that I researched and learned, the more I realized that the conservative evangelical Christian path was not for me. I didn't want that lifestyle for myself. So by my mid 20s, I would say I would consider myself an agnostic atheist. But there were some aspects of religion that I did really miss, the more ritual type aspect, things like getting up in the morning and having my devotion while I drank my coffee and having prayer time and the community that I found in Christianity. So I had always loved nature and being outside and observing, the animals and the birds and the moon. And so I started researching more like nature based spiritualities. And that's kind of what led me to the path that I'm on today.
That is such a amazing turnabout. I mean, those things that you experienced must have really impacted you if you had grown up in such an ingrained culture with for you to then take a turn and become an agnostic.
It was a huge change for me, and it was really terrifying in a lot of ways. I experienced a lot of anxiety and depression during that time just because it felt like everything that I believed and everything I had built my life on was kind of crumbling around me.
Was this primarily because of these things that you had seen with the scandals? You questioned if what you believed in was based on what they stood for, then the validity of what you're believing in is in question?
Exactly. I mean, I had been raised to follow authority figures unquestioningly. I wasn't supposed to really have my own opinion or have any questions. If I was questioning things, it was because my faith wasn't strong enough. And when things started coming up that I couldn't explain away, I couldn't make excuses for within myself anymore, that was what really triggered this new path and researching, why do I actually believe this? Is it just because it's what I've been told and what everybody around me believes, or is it I truly believe it? And that's what led me to, becoming an agnostic and then eventually finding this new spiritual path.
Knowing how thoughtful you are, Catherine, I would imagine this was not a quick process.
It's definitely a slow process over several years. When I was going through those personal issues and seeing the scandals in the broader church, it really made me start reflecting on why I trusted church leaders and teachers to interpret the Bible correctly. And that just snowballed into questioning everything. I first started looking into the particular denomination of Christianity that I was part of, and then it kind of spread out into looking at other denominations. And eventually, I just realized that the Bible had a lot of inconsistencies and errors. And that was really the final straw because I was taught such a literal interpretation of the Bible. That was really the foundation on which I was supposed to build my entire life. And I was always taught, even if a church leader or teacher is wrong about something, or if they fail and sin, fall into sin, I can still fall back on the Bible because it's always true. And when I realized that I couldn't trust that the Bible was 100% accurate and true all the time, then it really wasn't that solid foundation anymore that I could build my life on.
I did look into a few other religious traditions and deities to some extent. For the most part, I found them unconvincing and unappealing because they all ultimately seemed to use very similar arguments and reasoning. A lot of them kind of felt like Christianity with a different name. Um, but I have always felt and hoped that there is something beyond the physical realm, and I never fully identified as an atheist. So I kind of landed in agnosticism for a long time. I would probably still loosely consider myself agnostic because I have a hard time firmly stating a belief in something that I have no physical evidence for. But over the past few months, I have been kind of opening myself up to the idea of spirit and deity. The most convincing and appealing view to me currently is kind of animism and like a type of pantheism, I suppose, where we are all part of source and man made religions are just our attempts to define and connect with whatever that source may be.
Thank you for sharing that, Catherine. You summed up what was years in the making perfectly. And I just commend you so wholeheartedly for posing such difficult questions to yourself and your belief system, especially at such a young age. You mentioned really enjoying specific rituals that you engaged in during your time with Christianity?
Getting up, having that devotional, having those private moments. It sounds like you were reticent to let those things go. Were you able to adapt them into your new spiritual journey?
To some extent, yes. Of course, certain things are fairly specific to Christianity, like reading the Bible. And I've read it a lot throughout my life, and I read it a lot when I was researching all of this and figuring out what I truly believed. But I kind of got to a point where it wasn't productive for me to read it anymore because I already had read it and knew kind of what I thought about it. For those things that keep me in touch in a spiritual way without it being specifically Christian. So things like reading other spiritual books and, lighting incense in the morning and, pulling an oracle card or a tarot card and having a time of meditation instead of prayer. Things like that really helped with that transition.
I was reading not too long ago that lighting incense, having crystals around, those types of things are really symbolic of our connection to nature. And
Yeah, I
so,
definitely find that to be true.
right, you have this close connection to nature. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
It's funny, actually, my parents have told me before that when I was a baby, if I would be upset or crying, the only thing that would calm me down was them taking me outside. And as soon as they would step outside, I would just instantly stop crying. So I do feel like this is a deep connection to nature that I've had my entire life.
That's amazing. We hear putting babies in the car, putting them on top of a running dryer, but you just needed to be out of whatever energy had around you and just have
Right.
that cleansing experience.
Yes.
That's really interesting. And I'm glad that they told you that. That must make you feel validated in having that connection even today.
It does.
Do you feel like that connection with the moon and the cosmic connection you have is an extension of that, or is that something that developed along your spiritual journey?
I think it's definitely connected to that innate love of nature that I've always had. It's definitely developed over the course of my life as well. I remember actually I was probably around like late elementary school, maybe middle school age. I had a homeschool project for one of my science classes where I was supposed to track the moon as it went through all of its phases over the course of 28 days. And I, did like the little drawings to show the different phases and where it moved through the sky. And I was just so fascinated by it. And I was learning about how the moon affects the tides and things like that. And it kind of enthralled me. And that was one of my favorite projects I ever did in school. And that really stuck with me. And I think it's manifested itself even more as an adult since I've gone down this spiritual path.
It's not lost on me that the female cycle is every 28 days. And so,
Yes.
yeah, so that connection to the moon is genetic, biological, at least
Yeah.
from that project. What did you find was your most favorite lunar cycle?
Aesthetically speaking, I love the full moon. It is so beautiful and awe-inspiring, and I love going out and sitting under the moon and just gazing at her and meditating. Energetically speaking, these days I do prefer the new moon. It has a far more calming effect on me, so I would say the new moon is probably my favorite.
It has a calming effect. I think a lot of people also use the new moon as a time to get charged up for certain types of projects or new endeavors. How about you?
Yeah, the dark moon, the new moon is definitely a time that I use to have a fresh start and, start new projects or new goals. That comes into the planner that I use a lot and kind of planning my goals and my weeks around the lunar cycle. The waxing moon I find is very energizing and I find myself to be most productive during that time. And then the full moon, as I said, it's very beautiful. I love it aesthetically, but it feels a little bit more of almost like a frenzied energy. It's so much
Mm.
energy, it's almost too much. And then with the waning moon, it's kind of starting to calm down, and it's a good time for like rest and reflection for me.
That's that's amazing that you're able to make that connection between what phase the moon is in and how it's actually impacting you. I think so many people
Yeah,
are turned on by the aesthetic part of the moon. As you mentioned, looking at a full moon is just, I think it's awe inspiring. But I don't
it
know how
is.
many people actually have made that connection for their energetic response.
Of course, with the moon, that's something tangible that you can actually see, and
True.
scientifically you can understand how it affects the world around us, like the tides and so many things in nature that the moon affects. So I think it is a lot more of a tangible thing that I can actually look at and see and feel that connection to. Not being able to see things definitely impacts your relationship to it. And so I find the nature-based spirituality specifically to be really meaningful to me because of that tangibility. And you can go out and touch the dirt and feel the rain and see the moon. And I think that's why I resonate with that so strongly.
That definitely makes sense. And definitely the energies of being around trees, even when things are clouded versus sunny. I mean, there's just an energetic impact that we can't deny for sure.
For sure.
And for someone who needs that extra validation, when you were questioning, am I just believing something because I've been told versus something that I really felt deep inside, I can see why that tangibility would be so important.
Yeah.
Speaking of tangibility, tell us all about this planner that you created. I remember asking you a while ago for some recommendations on a lunar planner because I was so inspired by your tracking certain things on the lunar cycle that I just couldn't wait to give it a shot. But my research did not come up with anything that I felt was super helpful in the way that I wanted to track things. So tell us all about your planner and why you decided to create it yourself and what it has specifically that meets your needs and perhaps mine.
So I've always been like a paper planner person. If I don't write something down, it's going to be out of my brain in 5 seconds. And the digital reminders just don't work very well for me. They're too easy to swipe and ignore. So I've always had a paper planner ever since I was a kid, even to, track school assignments and things like that. And a few years ago, when I was researching kind of the nature based spirituality, I came across the concept of different phases of the moon having different energies and impacting us in different ways. And I was really fascinated by that. And I found, I think on Pinterest or somewhere, I found this little graphic that showed the different phases of the moon and how they impact us energetically. And I kind of made my own version of that and just put it inside the planner that I was using at that time. And over the course of a few years, I was finding that keeping those moon phases in mind when I was planning was really helpful for me. And I was, more productive, and I felt my energy was more balanced when I was keeping these in the front of my mind during my planning. So I started looking for a planner, like you mentioned, that was kind of based around the lunar cycle and something that would help me really focus on that even more. And I wasn't finding anything either. I mean, there's a lot of really beautiful planners out there, even spiritual type planners
Yeah.
that focus on different aspects of spirituality. But there wasn't one that was really specific to the lunar phases. So I got my computer out and pulled up a Word document and kind of started playing around with it and made my own. And I've been using it for a couple of years now. And over that time, I've kind of made some tweaks to it as I've used it and learned more what works well for me and how the moon interacts with me specifically. But I do find it really helpful. I've got not just even the lunar cycle part of it, but I also incorporate aspects of like the wheel of the year for more seasonal type planning. And that it really helps with larger goals to spread them out throughout the year based on my energy levels, and then also like month to month within the lunar cycle and how my energy is fluctuating. I can kind of plan my goals and tasks around that. So it really helps in the broader scope of the year and in the day to day.
Katherine, I see an app in your future. No, you know what I really, really love about that is what you said about the confluence between the seasons and the lunar cycle. My mom is an Indigenous American, and she came from primarily farming, agricultural tribe, and they used lunar planning to instruct harvesting when to plant certain things. So we all know certain plants need to be planted later in the summer versus earlier in the summer. Some need to be planted in the spring. And that is a very indigenous way of plotting and planning their specific agricultural goals, right? And you just did that innately, intuitively. You included that into your planner as you were planning on how you planted seeds for next projects or things that you were going to take on or things that you were going to wrap up and then look forward to. I think that's amazing. What gave you that idea?
That's a good question. I can remember even years ago when I was still very deeply Christian, my family always had like a garden, in our backyard. And I remember even making that connection between gardening and spiritual life even then when I was a Christian. There's some references to that even in the Bible, I think. So it could have even stemmed from that. But I find that's something that's really lacking, especially in our modern society. When you look at how our ancestors lived, it was all entirely based around the cycle of the seasons and the lunar cycles. Their life 1,000 years ago during the summer, the heat of the summer looked very different than in the dead of winter. But post industrial revolution and the invention of the light bulb, and especially these days with the screens that we have in front of us all the time, our lives are pretty much the same no matter what season, no matter what time of the year, of the month, of the week. And I think that really has a negative impact on our society as a whole, on our individual mental health. I always think about in the dead of winter, that's historically supposed to be a time of rest and kind of turning inwards. It's dark, it's cold, you're spending more time indoors. But especially in American society, we have, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, all right there within like a 6 week period during some of the coldest and darkest months of the year. And so it suddenly becomes this time when we're frantic. We're running around shopping and cooking and going to parties and, planning all these big events. And so we really miss out on a lot of that rest and reflection that we could be using that time of year for. And I kind of mourn the loss of that way of life a little bit. And I try to incorporate it as much as I can. Of course, you still have to exist in modern society and you still have bills to pay in the winter, so you can't just stop working. But I try to incorporate as much of that as I can by using this type of planning.
As you're talking, I'm feeling this overwhelming sense of we are living to the antithesis of the natural world. To your point,
Yeah.
always in front of a
Mm-hmm.
screen, whether it's our phones, whether it's our tablets, whether it's the TV.
Mm-hmm.
And the artificial light is a real thing. And there's
Mm-hmm.
no question that, especially since COVID and more people had to turn inward and rely on technology for school, for work, there's no question that the incidence of mental health problems has risen. The fact that we are living so disconnected to the actual cycles makes me wonder if that's not the reason behind so much disconnection. We often talk about being inward as meaning we're missing community with people, but I think it might be more foundational than that.
Yeah, I agree. And I always have this thought around the changing of daylight savings time because that's entirely a man-made thing and it always, completely throws off my sleep schedule for a couple of weeks until I get adjusted to the new time. And it's like if we just got back in touch with nature and followed those natural cycles, it wouldn't have this really intense negative impact on our mental health and our physical health, that loss of sleep that you experience around a time change. I was reading the other day about how much higher the incidence of heart attacks is the day after daylight savings time change. And it has these really tangible effects on our bodies and our minds. And, even with the Julian calendar that is commonly used now, it's not perfect. So every 4 years, we have to have that leap day.
Right.
And in so many ways, it would be so much easier to just follow the cycles of nature, but we've gotten so disconnected from that.
Yeah, for sure. And you did it so that people would be more productive longer during the daylight hours. So it was all about productivity. There is no question to me that our moods, our productivity are directly related to sunlight. And I was one of these people, I don't know about you, Catherine, but I did my stint working night shift. And for me, it was horrible. And I was a very young person. And you tend to think of young people saying, they just roll with the punches. Not me. I was not okay with that. It just felt like I was living in complete dichotomy to the rest of the world. I totally understand where you're coming from with this daylight savings time. I had no idea about the heart attack incidents, but it makes me wonder if Arizona, aren't they the only state that doesn't have the time change? Maybe they're the
I
healthiest
think
people.
that's right.
Yeah,
They
I
might
don't know.
be.
They're also the hottest people. For whatever reason, they didn't adopt that torturous thing because it's always fun, right? When we get the extra hour, but when we spring forward, that blows.
Yes, it's so rough.
I'm just so impressed that that just intuitively was part of your thought process, even as a child. Do you think it's because you were born on the new moon?
Possibly. The fact that I was born on a new moon is still relatively new information to me. I didn't realize that until I had my first astrology chart reading a few months ago. Yeah, that could definitely have affected it.
During that astrology reading, was there any mention as to what that new moon meant for you, whether, personality wise or trajectory wise, as far as family, love life?
Yeah, we talked about that quite a bit. And it's interesting. I'm actually a double Leo. I'm Leo sun, Leo moon. But there are certain aspects of the Leo sun sign that I don't 100% relate to. When I was having that astrology reading done, she had mentioned that it could possibly be because I was born on the new moon. I kind of theorize a little bit, and I haven't researched this as much as I would like to. I want to look into it more, but I kind of theorize that it kind of turned a lot of my Leo traits more inward and made them more prominent in the moon side rather than the sun side, because
Mm,
I feel the Leo traits very much internally. It's just more of the external expression that I don't always align with fully.
right. Leos are center stage, spotlight seeking, and you
Yeah.
appear to be a more introverted I don't know that you're an introvert,
I
but
am, yeah.
you present completely opposite of what we think of Leos.
Yes, yes, I'm definitely introverted. I enjoy being around people, but the introvert, it kind of drains my energy a little bit, and I have to be alone to recharge for a while. I've never enjoyed being the center of attention. Like, I don't want people looking at me in a big group. I'm a
Wow.
lot quieter in big groups than I am, talking one on one. So I think there's something that I need to look into more there with the new moon. I think it could have affected that and possibly turned more of those traits inward.
That is super interesting. We all tend to think because of pop astrology, right? What's our sun sign? And there's just so much more than that. And the fact that you do
Yeah.
have the Leo really makes sense to me, how you would feel some of those things more on an emotional or, yeah, like almost like an inner fluidity, if that makes.
Yeah.
Have you always felt in like an introverted way energetically?
I think I could have been maybe a little bit more extroverted as a child than I am now. I do think also, external factors always play a role in how your personality traits present and things, and it can change throughout your life. I think, being heavily involved in that really conservative Christian world for so long possibly could have subdued my personality a little bit because women are not really supposed to be seen or heard very much in that world. But I would say I've always been a more introverted than extroverted.
I'm asking because I've always thought I was an extrovert and I'm either going through a radical life change or I am just slowly becoming more introverted and and energetically just what you said, Catherine, where if you're in a large group, it kind of wipes you out a bit and you need to recharge. And funny enough, I don't know about you, but the way I recharge is looking at the moon.
That's a great way to do it.
Do you practice any sort of moon magic? And if so, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I've definitely got some very like practical, tangible ways that I incorporate the moon into my spiritual practices. Things like drawing down the moon and grounding that energy and
Mhm.
meditating with the moon and making moon water and things like that. I really love all of those practices and use those regularly. Personally, I would say because I do feel this really deep connection to nature and the moon,
Mhm.
I look at moon magic as more of a broader framework that, my goals and my life and my day to day just kind of fits into because it does have that really strong impact on my mood and my energy levels and things like that.
You're living and breathing moon magic, actually. If someone was looking to gain a deeper connection with the moon, what do you recommend?
I would recommend starting with at the most basic level, just stepping outside and looking at the moon and just appreciating the beauty and feeling that energy. Meditating with the moon is a great way to start connecting with that lunar energy and feeling what that means to you and how that affects you personally. I love meditating under the moon outside when I can, but if
Mm.
the weather doesn't permit, you can still meditate with the moon inside and just do some visualization practices. And if you want to take it a step further, tracking the way that your mood and mental health and energy levels fluctuate throughout the different lunar phases is a really great way to start noticing patterns. And for me, I know the new moon is a time of resetting and starting new things, and I feel energized but very calm. But then the new moon I know makes me a little bit stressed out, but for other people it may be different. So having some type of tracker where you can follow those patterns over the course of several months can be really helpful.
So really, it's becoming more aware of the connection that may already exist.
Yeah, it's already affecting you,
Right.
but bringing that mindfulness and awareness to it can help a lot.
I just love that. I always feel like the moon itself just feels so magical. And I know there are so many people that connect to it aesthetically. So I love these steps that you're providing to kind of strengthen that connection even more. Who needs a deity? We got the moon. When we're in a conservative environment, whether it's religious, whether it's political, whether it's just a closed, insular kind of family unit, because of its insularity, it is a safe space. You are in a homogenous group of people who primarily think like us, act alike. When you venture outside of that, it can be really, really scary. And you mentioned having some nerves around that. Was it because you had taken a toe and stepped outside that you felt that wall of safety was dissipating? Or was it more of a, I'm going to get struck down by lightning because I no longer living for Christ the way that I promised I would? Or was it all of it?
Yeah, it was definitely a little bit of all of it. The fear of being struck down was definitely there for the first little while. That one probably passed the quickest.
That resonates with me totally, Catherine. I just was sidestepping and staying in the basement during all thunderstorms for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, the first Sunday I actively chose I'm not going to church today was really terrifying. But once that got past and I made it through and everything was okay, then I started, calming down a little bit on that one. But the more lingering anxieties were definitely the loss of safety. Like you said, growing up in such an insulated environment and living where I do in such a conservative area, having that sense of knowing that you know and thinking that you have all the answers is
Mm,
very comforting in a way.
it
And
is.
suddenly stepping out into this world where maybe I'm not even sure what I believe. It's not even that I'm changing my belief. I'm not even sure what I believe for a period of time. And then realizing that maybe I believe something different than 90% of the people around me, it's really scary because suddenly you don't necessarily have all the answers and you know that you don't have all the answers and that brings a little bit of fear with it.
I can definitely see that because having that knowing and this all agreed upon premise, whatever it is is a level of comfort that okay, I don't need to think about that right now. Like that major portion of me has already been answered. And now I think about other things where once you kind of lift that veil and the new moon comes out, you are questioning pretty much everything.
Right. And when you step out of a deeply religious environment like that, suddenly you don't have all these people around you reinforcing those beliefs anymore. It kind of feels like you're just drifting out at sea all by yourself and you don't have anyone that you can even necessarily talk about these things with. So that brought another level of anxiety with it. And I'm very grateful at this point in my life that I found several different groups of people that I can
Mm.
have these conversations with and that resonate more with the way that I look at the world and the things that I think and believe. But for a while, especially when I very first started the whole deconstruction process, it was really scary feeling so alone in that.
I can imagine, especially you have been and continue to be with your family. And if you're having a break
Yeah.
from a common belief system, it would feel almost, and I don't know if you felt this way, but it could feel like you're abandoning them, or they may have perceived it as abandonment.
Yeah. And to some extent, I haven't even had the full conversation with my family about, my current spiritual path and things like that. I tend to keep that more private because I know it wouldn't lead to anything good. But yeah, there was definitely a fear of judgment from family and friends, and a fear of not only judgment from them, but a fear of hurting them because they
Sure.
still hold these beliefs so deeply. And, that's never my intention, never my desire to hurt anyone. But it gets really, really deeply emotional and tangled up and messy really quickly.
Right, especially when you know your family wanted nothing but good for you. It's not
Right.
that they're doing something that was intentionally deceptive or out of alignment with what they would want for their children and other loved ones. Yeah, that can be very conflicting. So
Yeah, that's helped me a lot in my healing journey, is finding that internal common ground with family and friends, and understanding that we're all coming from a place of love ultimately.
Mhm.
And that's why my family raised me the way that they did, and that's why, my community and my friends believe the things that they believe, is because they do love me and they love each other. And trying to recognize it from that perspective of love has been really helpful.
I think that's super important because oftentimes we feel angry or hurt over decisions that have been made. But when we take a step back and realize the intent behind it was was nothing but love, it removes that charge quite a bit.
Right.
So what's next for you, Katherine, on your spiritual journey?
I really just want to go deeper. I feel like I've been really broad for a number of years in my whole deconstruction process and trying to find a path that worked for me. And so now that I have kind of landed here where I have, I just want to go deeper and understand more, and do more meditating and connecting with nature. And I've got some retreats that I'm planning on going to this year to try to connect more with spirit and with nature, and hopefully figure out what I believe about deities, because I have some baggage there with the Christian God. But yes, I'm trying to learn to look at it as more of a partnership and relationship rather than a hierarchy.
It is hard to step out of that when you've been indoctrinated in a belief system that has us in a position of worshiping or exalting something that is on a higher pedestal than we are. It is hard to reverse that mindset.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting, when you study how our brains work, and when you start learning something new, or thinking about something differently, and it literally has to carve a new path in your brain. And it does take a lot of time and repetition to be able to assimilate new information or beliefs or practices into your life.
Good point. Even for dietary or exercise, sounds like a lunar cycle that you need at least 21 days to kind of reform a new habit. For any good habit, it tends to take at least 21 days. But to your point, to change that neural pathway after so many years of having a specific belief system is just amazing. And again, I think it's amazing that you just singularly made that decision to step out and question. I just think that that's phenomenal. All my hats off to you on that. Katherine, thank you so much for sharing your story and your lunar connection with us, and how you came to recognize what an impactful relationship with the moon can have.
I'm wondering if you would leave some inspirational words in an invocation for us to share with our listeners, maybe on how better to connect with nature and their own intuition. Thank you, Katherine.
May the gentle, pure light of the moon shine upon you, illuminating your life's path. May its soft, radiant beams infuse your heart with warmth, your spirit with joy, and your soul with peace.
Thank you for joining the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast. Constructive and positive feedback are always welcome. Drop us some fan mail at mysticalmermaidlounge@buzzsprout.com or email us directly at mysticalmermaidlounge@yahoo.com. Finally, we do not accept sponsorships or ads so that we may bring a less distracting message to our listeners. So, if you are just as passionate as we are about educating and supporting spiritual seekers, then please brew some tea or joe and pour us a cup at buymeacoffee.com/Mystical Mermaid Lounge. Thanks again, and catch us at the next high tide. Bye-bye.